So, what is myth? What is a myth? Well, I mean, we could start. We couldn't do much worse than answering that question. Did anybody answer the question? What is a myth?
It's an explanation to phenomena that can't be explained.
Explanation to something that can't be explained. Good. Give me an example.
Afterlife, things like
The
that.
afterlife. What happens when we die? There was some other hands. Anyone? Yes.
A modern explanation of what a myth could be is something that is not true.
That is a modern explanation, yeah. So when we say, like, well, if you watch, anybody ever seen the show Mythbusters?
Yeah.
What do they do on that show?
They try to see if something's plausible or not.
Yeah, like, we heard you get better gas mileage if you turn your AC off, so we're going to drive 10,000 miles, whatever. So they'll do stuff like that, and they'll see. Yeah. And so that's more of a modern way of looking at myth. But is that what Karen Armstrong says about the word myth?
Another interpretation of it would be like something that may have once been believed heavily, but as time goes on, it fades because not everyone follows it or believes in it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Just think of stories.
I think you're onto something there. Let's write that down, because if we were to give a really... Here's the problem with the term, okay? I'll just be honest with you. It's a difficult word to talk about because a lot of people that hold very dearly to myths don't like that word because it sort of implies that what they're believing is untrue. And so from a scholarly perspective, there's this effort to kind of like skirt the factual and just sort of say like, we're not really concerned, if Jesus walked on water. We're concerned with the power and how effective the story is to tell a message, which is great, except people don't really process their faith or the history of their religion that way. Yes?
I think the question is in the third paragraph. Probably a good explanation of it.
Read it for us,
This is
please.
another peculiar characteristic of the human mind, is its ability to have ideas and experiences that we cannot explain rationally.
Exactly. So it's the ability to explain things that we don't understand rationally. But again, I'm a little bit, I'm going to be honest with you, I approach the study of myth a little bit critically. I think that some of the stories happened. So, but I wasn't there. It actually would require me to have faith. I wasn't there, so I don't know. I'd have to have faith that it happened that way. But then you grow into this sort of questioning of like, did people just make up stories, or were people trying to legitimately account for historical things they witnessed? It puts a huge burden of proof on us to figure out if they were delusional or if they really saw what they say they saw. We can't prove that, though. That's the problem. So from a scholarly perspective, an academic perspective, we're not concerned with proving what happened that we weren't there to witness. All we can do is look at what the result of the event or the lasting legacy of the story is. And I know that's confusing. And I mean, it is. And so some people will be offended if you say, the important stories of their religion are myths. But there's a key word here that we always will add. It's a meaningful story. So, is the story the point, or the meaning of the story what's important?
The meaning, of course.
Right.
I mean, that's the whole reason behind it all. I mean, nobody falls into something because they're like, oh yeah, it's a cool idea. It's because the whole concept of it is captivating.
And I totally agree. So but is the meaning weakened if the story is untrue?
It's all
It's all perspective.
Depends who you are.
Yeah.
Depends who you are. Okay, so interpretation is kind of a subjective thing, and how you interpret the meaning for yourself might make a difference. I heard some voices.
I could see it being interpreted differently based upon how believable the story is.
Well, most religious myths, or at least most mythology, is pretty unbelievable. I mean, if things are happening outside of the natural realm. I mean, you know, if the Red Sea is parted, that's a miraculous feat. I mean, it's supernatural. It's going to be some great thing. If we talk about Osiris, you know, and Seth and Ra and all the Egyptian gods and the myths, the stories, most of what they did was impossible. You know, it's not natural. You had a hand?
So could you also say that modern day Christianity is all myth?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting at here. If we are going to qualify these stories that we cannot prove, they fit into the category of myth. But this is where people try to skirt this sensitivity and say, but it doesn't matter if it's true or factual or historical. The study of myth is concerned with how effective those stories are in bringing meaning to people's lives. I think it's like you're trying to have it both ways if you do that, though. And it sort of defies, you know, at some point you have to make a decision. Am I going to, you know, have faith, or am I going to try to rationalize everything if you're a religious person? You know, I saw another hand. No hands. Thought I saw something. Okay, you got a hand.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, I was going to add a point. I mean, especially when it comes down to like phenomena, the world itself is something that almost can't be explained. There's things that we've just found out that we don't know, and still there are things on this planet that we still don't know about. Like our oceans are largely unexplored.
Mm-hmm.
All the events that have happened, there are records of things happening, but we don't know. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so you can try to rationalize a lot of things, but the world sometimes is a very irrational place. There's things that happen that can't be explained. There's things that have been done that people can't really understand at some point, you know.
Right.
Get to the gray parts.
But science would say that we just don't know now.
Well, yeah.
So it's not that it cannot be known. We just have limitations in human knowledge.
Exactly.
But we're always learning more. So
Yes.
what we know today about the world was different than what people knew 100 years ago.
Exactly.
But even with the discovery of space, and now we're talking about black holes and event horizons and parallel universe possibilities and time travel and all these things that would have seemed like just myth or fantasy 100 years ago, or now we don't know.
Now irrational almost seems mythical.
And some rational human's going to fly into a black hole. So just let's see. You know,
I'm just saying.
we can find out what happens, and that'll be the day, right?
There you go.
But
Interstellar.
yeah, I love that movie.
Yeah.
Really good. So, a myth is a meaningful story. But she says a lot of things here that I think need to be substantiated. One thing she does say is that the Neanderthal were certainly reflecting about death in a way that their fellow creatures did not. And then she says animals watch each other die, but as far as we know, they give the matter no further consideration. Do you think that's true? Okay. I'm curious to hear. I see hands and I have a loud roar of no's. Yes, let's hear it. What? Anybody, go for it.
Elephants.
That's what I thought of. Explain that one.
Well, they will always return to the same place where their family died, and they'll always get kind of edgy around it.
Yeah.
They
Like
have
a
like
cult
whole
graveyard.
groves, like you said. Mammoths do the same thing, wolves did the same thing, and dolphins do the same thing. They exhibit social behaviors as well as chimpanzees and things like that.
Yeah, there's some evidence with the apes. Yes. How about you, Warren?
Just like the whale that wouldn't let the baby go.
Right.
She kept it for 19 days.
Mm-hmm. So,
That's what I was going to say.
is that the one? What were you going to say?
You also have the dogs who will go back to their owner's graves.
Right.
Like if they're brought to the funeral, they'll go back to their owner's graves.
So here's the dogs thing. Remember that dog that like waited on the platform for his anyways.
Those are called tearjerkers and.
Yeah. So, I'm not crying. No, but
It's allergies, that's what
the
we say.
but here's the big question. So, is what we are talking about reflecting on life beyond, or just grieving the natural loss of something close to you?
There's no way to know that.
Well, that's true.
You can't know what the animal's thinking about. It looks like they're just grieving.
Right.
Really, there's no evidence that says that they think about anything about like an afterlife. There's no evidence.
True.
For that. It's not like they like.
So, what about the atheist who puts no stock in anything beyond this life, and we can know what they're thinking, and they're still grieving, still doing the same things? Does that make them? How do we explain that? Is that still an overshadowing reflection of there being more meaning to life than just life, or?
I feel like it should.
I feel like that seems more like, they're like, okay, it's over for them and I'll never see them again. But, I don't know, there's just no sort of comfort in that at all. I don't understand.
I think it's more how it impacts that person rather than really concerned for the person that is dead or gone.
Mm-hmm.
You think life just kind of stops, lights
Sure.
turn out and goes black for them.
Like maybe you're sad for them.
I feel like
That's
you're
just
more
like
sad
how
for
a
yourself.
funeral, it's for the living. I mean, the dead person doesn't care if they show up or not. I don't believe.
Sure,
So
well, yeah,
I feel it's all for the person.
And I think that may even be sort of the evolution of the funeral itself, though. I think we've kind of arrived at this kind of notion that this is really for the grieving, not the deceased. But we got to this point because there was a very strong emphasis that how a body is handled once the person has died depends on what happens to them in the next life or in the other world or heaven or hell or whatever. So it's a very, and I tend to agree. I always tell my family, I'm like, when I'm dead, whatever's cheapest, just go for it. I don't really care. I'm not going to care. So, either I'm going to be in heaven not thinking about you, or I'm going to be in hell not thinking about you. So, one way or another, I'm going to be in either a great place or a bad place. So just do whatever you think you should do But that in itself, and again, though, we're looking at meaning. And so meaning of life and meaning of existence and meaning in ceasing to exist does not occur in a vacuum. It affects everyone around you. Like, our value of what makes life meaningful is also found in, how we relate to others and how others experience us as part of their life, or the inevitable, terrible absence, from their life. And so the myths and the rituals, and that's the word that kind of is floating out there, is myth never exists without having some kind of ritual. There's always a ritual. If there's a myth, there's a ritual. What's a ritual?
A funeral.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. The process of burying the dead, putting them in the ground, blessing, splashing water, whatever we do, burn them to make sure something, put them in a pyramid in a tomb so it's pointing to heaven and the pharaohs will make it to heaven. There's some sort of action that accompanies the belief, the story. And so rituals are really just stories myths acted out. So to give you a common example, Christianity being very common here in the Bible Belt, or the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, Texas, we see, like with baptism, like people going down, getting wet, coming back up. We see that paralleled in the myths or stories of the New Testament, John the Baptist and Jesus. When you take communion, that represents the breaking of bread, that is symbolically representing the body of Christ. When you drink the wine, it's symbolically a ritual representing the story of his blood being poured out on Calvary, and also paralleling a very important story, meaningful story, of when he did it with his apostles or disciples. So you see this in Christianity, but you see this in Hinduism. You see this in Islam. The Hajj is probably one of the biggest rituals of Islam. Does anybody know what the Hajj is? It's when you go to Mecca.
Oh, yes.
And it's based on the story of Hagar from the Old Testament, who was in the wilderness, and because the belief is that Abraham, instead of having a child with Sarah, according to the Old Testament, he conceives a child, Ishmael, with Hagar. And so Islam believes that the root of their religion comes from the line of Ishmael. Ishmael was the chosen one. Hagar was the really the beloved wife, essentially. But their story reflects this traveling to Mecca, out in the wilderness. And they do all these certain, very specific scripted things. They, march around the Kaaba. And we'll talk about that later. But all religions have rituals that directly represent myths from their holy books. But, again, we think of religion like that in a very modern sense. When everything she's talking about with the Neanderthal, and eventually would go on, we would see this in, ancient Samaria, the Babylonians, Egypt, over in the Far East, with, the Indus Valley and the Yellow River Valley, and all of these emerging systems of belief and myth, those were very, I don't know how to say it, normal. Like, to have a system of mythology, and ritual wasn't like, I decided I'm going to be Muslim. It was like you were born into a system, a culture, and a society that was entrenched in these ideas, that were every part of the fabric of your everyday life was consumed with the idea and the notions of gods, goddesses, and their interaction with the natural world. So you still see a little bit of this. If you go to like Thailand. I went to Thailand a few years ago, and quite an experience, Bangkok. But everyone is Buddhist. I mean, it's not even negotiable. It's not like you decide, I'm not really going to do the Buddhist thing. I mean, that doesn't really exist. Everybody is Buddhist. Every building has a shrine on the front of it. Every doorway has things hanging that are rituals that substantiate their myths, that bring favor from gods and spirits and all this stuff. I mean, it is everywhere. So to them, it's like to be Thai is to be Buddhist. Despite, maybe what some people think. I don't know if I should go there yet, but some people sort of have this notion. I guess I'm going there anyway. So some people have this idea that, because I'm American, I'm Christian. And, okay, I mean, I get it, but at least according to the normal tenets of the faith, you have to make a decision. I mean, you're not, born Christian. You have to at some point. Now, that sort of idea existed 100 years ago, and if you go to Europe today, you still find people that are born socially part of maybe, Lutheran evangelicalism or something like that, because they're not Catholic. Like when I was in Germany recently, I had to register, and one of the things they asked, they said, are you Protestant or are you Catholic? And I'm like, or you don't want to say. And I didn't understand the question. But what they're really asking is, everyone who's one of the other or the other has to pay a religious tax. And so if you want to be married in the church, if you want to be buried with your family, if you want to whatever, you have to pay a 10% tax on all of your income so that you can participate in the state church. And there's only 2. And if you choose not to be part of that, so a lot of, but the funny thing is, there's more atheists in Europe than just about anywhere else in the world. But they all check a box because there's like a meaning of value socially for them, but it's not really rooted in any sort of belief system. I'm not sure why I went down that road, but only to say that societies have a tendency to sort of put an emphasis on a particular religion, but you have to make a rational decision, I think, at least in terms of Christianity. If you want to be a real Christian, theologically, you would have to make a decision for Christ. You'd have to repent and have faith. Okay, so maybe I'm talking too much. Did I tell you I was a preacher? I didn't, maybe, so that might be why. I'm slipping into the preaching. I'll try not to do it, but it does happen. So the best thing is, she gives us this really interesting comparison, kind of a modern day what people seem to be doing when they substitute like drugs, alcohol, music for this kind of mythical experience. What do you think about that? Any thoughts on that? Do you remember where that is? Oh, you didn't read? Okay. We'll read next time. But it says here, let's see, and I thought this was really powerful. It's on the 5th page, so the next to last page, right there at the top, and she says, religion has been one of the most traditional ways of attaining ecstasy, but if people no longer find it in temples, synagogues, churches, or mosques, they look for it elsewhere, in art, music, poetry, rock, dance, drugs, sex, or sport. Like poetry and music, mythology should always awaken us to rapture, even in the face of death and despair. So, but I thought that the connection she's trying to make there was interesting. Does anyone agree with that? Do you think that those are the same as the religious experience? What do you think?
Okay, I may be thinking too much into it, but is that like trying to fill a spiritual void with anything that's not spiritual? I mean,
it's kind of.
I don't know any other way of explaining it. I guess that's the only way it's explained to me.
Or can you achieve some kind of spiritual experience through those other things?
Absolutely not. It's spiritually deadened you to do some of this stuff.
True. Okay, I mean, that's
only because that's a place where I've been in my
Sure.
life that is spiritually dead because of certain things. And
yeah. What do you think?
I don't remember what the religion is, but there is a religion where people use dream root, which can make you have
You use what?
dream root. It can cause like illusions. I don't know what the actual name for it is. Like, it's whatever it's called.
It's hallucinogen.
Yeah, it's a hallucinogen.
They use it in part of their rituals. and stuff.
They use it when they go on
Like down in,
spiritual.
like in South America?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
I
in
can't
South
remember what it's
America.
called. There's a bunch of stuff about it.
There's a bunch of stuff. I think I watched that.
They use it for like healing purposes, like how you said, like rituals. Like they'll actually heal people's like mental health and all kinds of stuff.
It can be used for healing, spiritual journeys, finding out more about your family. Even some of them use it for.
I don't like my family. I don't want. I won't be getting high on that drug. Okay.
A lot of native tribes have tribe shamans, and they'll take like Yuri or whatever the hell.
It's a perfect example.
They'll go on these things to find out answers or speak to their ancestors or whatever the case may be for that particular religion. But it's drugs can definitely be part of religion.
I think you're right. I think historically, especially with shamans and the practices that they would do, they would act out these rituals that were based on myths, and they would use drugs to sort of enhance the experience or trigger the spiritual experience. Yeah.
I don't really agree with what she said because it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, go on.
Always, if you don't believe in a religion,
Mhm.
you're not going to be attracted to these other things naturally. I've never seen any evidence of that.
Say that. Explain that a little bit. I think that you're onto something, but expand that a little bit.
Well, basically, she's implying that there's like this void in your life that you have to fill with something.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no something.
But there's plenty of instances where you meet atheists
Mm-hmm.
that do not do any of these other things in like a religious fervor that she's describing.
Sure. I mean, there would be no way to prove that any human has a spiritual void. I mean, how could you prove that naturally?
Well, we do have human needs, and that's really, I think, what the whole point is. I think anybody would agree that we do have a need, and and there are certain needs that can be fulfilled, but there are certain needs that will be lacking depending on what you do in those situations.
So do humans need some kind of spiritual experience to
Well,
be human? What do you think?
I'm not saying they need spiritual experience, but they do need to feel an experience that they produce. It produces an experience. You know, every human grows off experiences ever since you were a kid. So that kind of evolves when you become an adult, and you kind of branch out and you build on your experiences while you go about living. That's the whole point.
Right. So we need experiences.
It's
So maybe it's more of a matter of like, in order to flourish as human, there's certain things we need to experience. How about you?
I don't think like none of this stuff matters what you do. It's mostly the religion or the music and drugs is just a social way of acting.
That's a very strong argument that what it is people get out of any myth or religion or the rituals thereof are the community that they're experiencing. Drugs, kind of the same, but if you follow that path long enough, you're going to end up isolated. I mean, the party ends eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and for me, like, I totally understand what they're saying. Like, to me, there's a difference between the spirituality part and religion. Because in my opinion, you can be a spiritual person who practices, compassion, love, and all that, all those things, and not practice any religious things. Because to me, religion is like do's and don'ts. Like,
sure.
That's me personally. Like, you're gonna kneel down in front of the cross and blah blah blah. And spirituality is like, I'm giving you compassion and love and kindness and consideration and all of that stuff that you should be doing anyway.
But that's a good point.
Where my theory is with it, and I get what they're all saying. Like, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And I think with a lot of what you're saying there that kind of is beginning to form is really good, because where we're going to go with the discussion of values, like, is kind of based on the spiritual principles of like how you treat people, having like how you view morals fall into that category, ethics, why you do something, why it's right or wrong. And so some people may use the terminology spiritual, but some may think of it just as ethical and practical. And the one thing that I like about the next thing that we're going to read next time on the universal values is they try to bring in all the voices, humanists, atheists, and all the world religions, and find where they have a common idea of what good spiritual or ethical or moral values, where we can find overlap. And if we can find agreement between all of these disparate religions and non-religions and spiritualities and naturalism and whatever else, if we can find where we agree, then that's where we should put our focus on being human. And we find there's some agreement. And I think, the world's a better place when we can accentuate and kind of underscore agreement rather than focus on disagreement. Just makes the world get along better, although it rarely works. But anyway, it's great. It's a romantic idea. Yes, ma'am.
I think a lot of that has to do with like that nature versus nurture question. I mean, a myth is like not, it doesn't even have to be really like the religion that we all see as religion, because they're like, my first thought was, I mean, even like cults that practice and use drugs like regularly, okay, well, they have a set of myths that, steer their direction and, help to teach the children that are born into the cult, so, I don't know, I feel like there are so many different ways to describe myth, for all of us, so when you get down to it, myth is really, it's just, I don't know, like direction.
So
it can be any direction, yeah. So like every human needs meaning. So she writes about in here, we seek meaning, whether that be meaning in something that's, technically wrong. In the cult, we still find there are still people that are drawn to that set of beliefs.
Right, it's true. Yeah.
So
even if even if their meaning is wrong, or
I mean, to them, if they're taught that way, it's not wrong to that group of people. It all depends on what social construct you are in.
So that's a really good question. You just touched on the big one right there, because now we have to wonder, is morality objective, or is it subjective, or is it some balance of both?
But I feel like if you're spiritual, you don't really you have a broad understanding of other humans, where they come from and what they might know. Like, there's a bigger picture than just, as far as like religion goes, it's like, oh, I know exactly like what, how to feel about it.
So how do we know where morality comes from?
I was thinking logos, ethos, pathos. Like
Okay.
all those
Rhetorical appeals. Good.
Yeah,
What
I
are
was
you
thinking
going?
of that because I think we all go through that at some point. Even when it comes into spirituality, we think of it in a rational way, we think of it in an ethical way, and then we think of it in an emotional way, and we try to experience it with other people. So I think really that's what it boils down to when it comes down to an experience as well. Even though it's branching off into like Greek philosophy and things like that, I do think that it applies to even religions as well.
Sure.
You know?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, the concepts of, those were Aristotle's ideas, and we'll talk about him a little bit. And yeah, he sort of applied those kind of ideas throughout his philosophy. So, okay, here's a question. Is cold-blooded, premeditated murder always wrong?
No.
It's not always wrong.
Because you have a war.
But I said, no, I didn't say war. I believe that you can make a defense of a just war concept.
Questions like that, the type of person that I am, it's hard for me to answer because it's like, it may be wrong to me, but like I told you, the way I look at things, I have like a broad understanding, and dude, that guy could have killed somebody for a perfectly good reason and in his head, and I have no argument over it except for my opinion.
Sure.
Not whether it's right or wrong, but I have my opinion on what I believe.
Sure, yeah. So what about cold-blooded, pre-calculated rape to somebody who's much younger and more defenseless than you? Is that always wrong?
Yeah. I'd say so.
Why?
It
Might be right in my mind. She said that as long as it's right in the mind of the person, that might be able to...
The word that gets me is premeditated. That means you sat and thought about it.
Even if you didn't know.
And like, really like played it out.
I think we're missing
And
the
then
point.
you turn around.
So how do
and
we
did
know
it.
it's wrong, though?
I think we're missing the point here because when
Where
we
does-
think of something as us as an individual, but when we get to a point where when we're mature, you're talking about an adult here, we start thinking not for ourselves, but for people with us. And you start thinking, well, is this something right for that person? You know? So there's that point where you start to realize that, hey, you got to step out of your shoes. You got to think in someone else's perspective, and
Sure.
that's also what defines right and wrong, or spiritual, moral things like that.
I think you have a point. Good.
I think that depends entirely on what society you're brought up in.
It's wrong in all societies.
Right. So
Right.
if there's ever going to be any kind of society that says that that's right, I've yet to ever hear of.
And the same thing goes for premeditated, cold-blooded murder. It's wrong in all societies.
They're missing Greek culture.
But then they you can redefine your terms a little bit, and that might help you get away with it. But
Well, maybe the cold premeditated murder was because somebody was cold premeditated raped.
Right.
Yeah,
There we go.
so an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
It's very
So if you
It's the subjectiveness that you were talking about. I think it's
Sort of.
subjective. I think more people would, almost every single one of us could agree that premeditated rape is going to be wrong in almost every single situation.
Yeah,
But I think there is some people that are a little bit more cutthroat that would say that premeditated murder as a reason for justice. I think some people would agree with that, some people wouldn't. I think it's just people being morally flexible.
But we have to define it. Warren, help us out here, brother.
It isn't like the premeditated murder. Isn't that the same thing as a death penalty?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, some people take that approach. I think you could argue, some might argue that. We also have to consider that all societies are what defines them as societies, and civilizations have laws. That's what civics are. So laws sort of dictate where the government can kill, and it be considered moral or immoral. That brings it down to a subjective kind of case. But generally, those who believe that... Here's the thing. I think with the death penalty, maybe it's thought of as stopping what is evil as it is. Unfortunately, though, a lot of people get the death penalty that were not really proven guilty, or that's kind of sucky. But anyway, so you've got people that are a force of evil that are bad for everyone else, kind of coming back to this idea that should you stop evil if it is destroying innocent people's lives? If it happens to be a person that you're stopping, is that moral?
That's where that fine line is.
It's a very fine line.
If a man rapes my daughter, I hope her daddy premeditates how to kill that man and kills him, you know? I mean, but
We also
then
have to
there's
define our terms here, though,
Yeah,
because premeditated is different. That
Yeah.
might be considered an act of a crime of passion,
True.
and he would be considered less culpable for the highest penalty of the law because he acted. Most people would say, "Yeah, I do the same thing." You know, give the guy a break. You know, and put him in prison for a couple of years, let him out. But if you're like sitting at home and it's like I picked one person off and I thought about them every day for a month and I followed them everywhere they went, I knew their entire routine, and I cold-blooded planned to find them, drag them into the woods and kill them and bury their body and lie about what happened, is that a justifiable action? I mean, can we... I'm just wicked. I mean, I'm just mean. Too much death metal. I don't know. I'm just...
Somebody just pissed you off.
Well, it's not even that. You know, that's the. I think that's what I was trying to get at with cold-blooded, pre-calculated.
Yeah.
It's not always, that somebody just pissed you off. You're like, I want to kill someone, and I just hate that person because I just hate that person. I can't really explain it, but I just want to destroy them. I mean, and we call those people serial killers and psychopaths. Yes.
Now, let's think about it in this scenario. Say mass shooting, but the person got away. Most of the time in the mass shootings, they end up killing themselves. But this guy got away, and somehow his identity is revealed, and the police have not caught him. But you end up seeing him, and we're in Texas. A lot of people carry, so you take your chance and you kill him. What would that be considered? Would that be considered
Anybody have any
calculated?
thoughts about that?
Not really calculated because you ran across him by chance.
They have words to define these things. They would say that's an act of vigilantism, or if you made a citizen's arrest and they resisted, you could see. I mean, I don't know. What anybody thought? What do you think?
I feel like street justice, I think.
Street justice? Is street justice lawful justice?
No, I would say so.
Mass shooter, without them trying to harm you individually, they would tell you that you should have given a tip. You should have told the authorities instead of doing it in your own hands. That's the vigilante where there's street justice. That is not lawful.
It's not lawful.
You would definitely get thrown in jail.
But maybe not as much as if you were the cold-blooded, pre-calculated psychopath.
But what if it were released later that he was actually about to shoot up another place? Right.
Then it would be
self-defense.
But of course, and that's where we can talk theoretically and philosophically and come up with all these different ideas, and who knows? But we have to at some point trust that there's due process of law, there's investigation. As faulty as humans can tend to be in those areas, we still put a little level of stock and confidence that they're going to carry out the process and investigate. And if the guy can be vindicated, his attorney will fight really hard for that. And in a high-profile case like that, he's probably going to get a really good lawyer for free. Maybe he'll get, some sort of slack. People will think, hey, this guy's a hero, he's not a criminal. All those factors play in, and you just have to see what happens. I don't know. Yes, sir, right here.
In that situation, that would just be murder. Because even if you think you have a justified reason, might be the judge, jury, and executioner yourself. You're setting up that precedent that you can kill anybody.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
By me saying this question, I would not do that.
No. And I think
something that I thought of is what if someone did do that?
Sure. I mean, what it boils down to is what are they going to charge the guy with? They're going to charge him with murder, and now to the extent that his punishment is whatever, if he's convicted, that may have some variance, and depending on how the public eye and all these other factors decide whether he deserves to be put to death for it or not. It just sort of depends. I mean, you never know.
I think another situation to think about is for the premeditated murder anyway, is an abuse victim. Someone who's been abused for years and years. What if they plan it and then they do it? What would that be considered?
Yeah, I mean, there's 100 scenarios. I mean, I tend to follow the philosophy of show me who Jesus killed, and that's who I'll kill. That is the way I look at the act of killing. So I don't want to kill anyone. There's people who have to kill to protect my freedom. I thank them, but I'm not that guy. If they said you're going to go to war, I'd be like, yeah, that's a good one, because it's not happening. You know, I mean, I'm not. Somebody needs to do it, but I weigh 340 pounds. Okay, I got a back injury, so I'm not going. But ethically and morally, I just couldn't, with a clear conscience, take another life. Now, if someone was hurting my wife and child, I don't know what I'd do. I might kill them. I don't know. And I think those sort of... And then on the other side of it, I'd probably be like, yeah, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And I think that's important. Whatever you think is right and wrong, you should have a clear conscience about it. And whether you're charged with murder and the society finds you as guilty as murder, you have a personal responsibility to recognize the consequence of your actions and whether they were right or wrong. I mean, and that goes for everything. Lying, stealing, whatever. If I asked you if lying was wrong, would you say it's wrong?
No.
Why?
It depends on the situation, because then again, you're getting very...
Everyone says that.
Yeah, if you're going to right and wrong, it's all comes down to the person,
It becomes
majority rules.
So is who in here has never told a lie before?
If there's something big like at stake, I will say something to protect that.
Has anyone in here ever not told a lie? You've never lied in your whole life. So by definition, we are all liars. By definition.
Sometimes you have to do it.
I feel like
people you love.
Exactly.
So how?
Isn't a liar someone who constantly lies all the time?
How many lies?
If I have lied,
How many
I'm
lies?
not technically a liar because I don't lie anymore.
How many lies do you have to tell to be considered a liar?
I don't know. You have to do it on a daily basis. I would assume.
That's like a compulsive lie. Someone who doesn't even think about it. They're just lying.
Yeah.
So you got people that maybe because of some sort of psychological reason they just compulsively lie and they can't.
Most people just lie on occasion, I would say.
A lot of people lie because they think about it and they would rather tell a lie than face the consequences of telling the truth. Even if it's to protect somebody's feelings, you're really saying, like, I don't really want to deal with what they're going to say if I tell them the truth.
You just don't say anything at all. Then you're not lying or telling the truth.
You just omitted the truth.
It. And sometimes that's the best thing to do. And that's
so.
That could be that fine line of it. Am I telling you a lie because I'm not telling you the full truth? No, I'm not telling you anything. I can just say, I'm not going to tell you.
So here's a question then.
Omission is so a lie though, because if you ask your husband if he cheats on you and he doesn't say anything at all, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Right. Well, be like, I'm going to go outside now. You're lying.
If you don't like what your wife has on, don't tell her she looks back. Just go, maybe you should put on something else, honey. You're omitting, the truth that you really don't like that.
My wife and I have an understanding. You don't ask me that question unless you really. Well, here's how my marriage works. We don't talk about. We don't ask each other questions unless we really want the answer.
Exactly.
That is it. And so my wife, I'll say, hey, do you want to stop by Taco Bell and get something to eat? She'll be like, well, you're tired, you want to go home. And I'm like, stop. I would not have asked you unless I wanted to. Now, if I went and did it and I acted like a jerk the whole time because I was tired, then I'm a jerk. So you have to get, communication is important. So, okay, and, we're already in the next lecture with this conversation. But, so my question is, perhaps you could tell me, when do you want to be lied to? Never. Because we said there's a time that people should be lied to protect them. So when is that time? When do you want to be lied to?
If it was for my own safety and it would continue my existence, I'd rather be lied to at that point, make sure I didn't do anything, than to be told the truth. And then
so if your life depended on it.
I'm saying, if your life depended
I don't disagree. I think
I'd lie today.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to die. Yes.
Yeah.
If I ask how you're doing, and your life's falling apart, I'd rather you just lie to me and just say.
I would rather you just not ask. I mean, but here's the thing: in our culture, it's normative to ask and not really want to know.
Exactly.
If I, like when I work with my Chinese students and I say, how are you doing? They stop. It's not they don't understand the question. They're like, they're wondering, like, you know, because in their culture, you don't ask somebody that question unless you really are truly interested. And you put a hand up, I want to hear from you. And you had a hand too, and I passed you by. I'm a terrible instructor. In the back, say something.
Oh, and
help us.
The comment about when do you want to be lied to? I think it's quite interesting how many people have already forgotten loose lips sink ships.
There you go.
That's true. Does that come down to lying or omission?
A lie by omission is still a lie.
True. So if you talk too much, you're going to put yourself in danger.
Exactly.
I always prefer
agree
to
with that.
be silent unless I can improve upon the silence. That's my thinking.
There's some situations I've been in, and it's like, well, me telling you the truth isn't really going to hurt your feelings, but, like, we don't have to go there, you know, type of thing.
Explain that. I'm not sure I follow. Give me an example.
Like, I don't know, if you broke something of someone's that they don't even pay attention to, they've forgotten about it. You know what I'm saying? You broke it, they've forgotten about it. You're gonna go to them and be like, hey, I broke this, just so they can, like, fake get mad at you and, like, start this big ordeal. Or you just gonna, like, throw it in the trash and keep walking. Everyone's happy.
But what if it was your thing? Would you want somebody to do that to you?
That's what I meant by, like, I don't know, I'm a really complex person, and material things just don't really matter to
Right.
me.
I'm kind of
So,
the same way.
if
Like, on my wedding
like,
day...
if I don't pay attention to a book and you threw it away, or you, like, ripped 3 pages out of it to write down someone's number, like, oh, dude, sorry.
On my wedding day, one of my groomsmen said, hey, don't worry, I'll drive your truck to the reception. And I said, cool, man, thanks. So I never saw my truck again until I got back from my honeymoon, like 2 weeks later. And so I get back, and one day we're at Joann's, and we're walking out, and I was like, hey, what happened to the truck? Somebody ran into our car. So we're trying to figure it out, and then it turns out, I'm like, hey, did anything happen with my truck while I was gone? And he was like, oh, yeah, I forgot. I was going to tell you about that. Now, would I have been justified to be upset about that?
Yeah. Yes. For sure.
I wasn't, because I was like, whatever, I'm kind of like you. I don't, material things, I'm like, you know, we got insurance, you'll get it fixed. It doesn't matter. But I think I was more put off a little bit just in that, like, it was not responsible in telling me. And so he might have thought, though, well, maybe if I just don't say anything, I'm not lying. And that wasn't his heart. I mean, it wasn't what he was thinking. But so I see the omission when it matters just as bad as the lie,
But
personally.
this conversation has, like, you know, gave me a little new mindset, because it's like, I don't know, everything has a different, like, everybody has their different ways of looking at things, and just because I look at it that way doesn't mean that you didn't look at it like that, so I shouldn't really just take it as
True. And if we get anything out of this sort of idea, these sort of scenarios, is it kind of boils down to, like, you know, think of others maybe before you think of yourself, put others first, show compassion, treat people the way you'd want to be treated. These sort of universal principles that we find that are not strictly
we don't
Jewish or
all the
Christian.
time.
But the world would be a better place if we all conducted our affairs according to those kind of values or spiritual principles, as we may call them.
And isn't that why Buddhist monks say the loss of self is how to achieve enlightenment?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they would say that suffering, you know, is, you know, attachment to the material world is the source of all suffering. And, yeah, we'll get into that for sure.
That's Buddhism?
Buddhism, yeah. So
Well,
there's
lots of different religions or perspectives, I guess you could say.
all there is merit to all religious values, and we're going to deal with that. Just because sometimes values make it into a religion because they're good human values, not because the religion says it. And so we're looking at humanity, and one of the byproducts of humanity is obviously this existence of religion and spirituality and myth, but it's all rooted in some sort of philosophical thing. So even the study of religion is philosophy. And so we'll talk about some more philosophy in here, but it's the joining of two words, philos and sophos. think if I can write it here in Greek for you. Let me see if I remember. Philos. No, wait, that's not right. I can't remember. Usually I would think. I took Greek forever, but you know, nobody speaks ancient Greek, so you forget it. So what does philos mean? Does anybody know? Well, if you go to Philadelphia, what is that city called?
City of brotherly love.
City of brotherly love. And so philos means love.
Yeah.
What does sophos mean? Does anyone know? If you are sophisticated, what are you?
Advanced.
You're advanced. And that word is rooted in sophos, which means wisdom. So everything we're talking about here is philosophical, and it deals with the love of wisdom. This manifests itself in religion, ethics, values, morals, but they kind of boil down to what we would call a worldview. Like, how do you view the world and your society, your culture, your religion, your nature versus nurture, as we've said? All of those things have an impact on how you view the world. And generally, you know, across the board, there are rare exceptions, of course, to what I'm going to say, but people tend to agree on being sort of good to each other, you know, to some degree. You know, I mean, there are obviously exceptions to this, to finding value in family, finding value in community, finding value in having a good work ethic, as we call it, responsibility, you know, being a good person, however we choose to define that. We see sort of this overlap, and it's a philosophical thing. It's just like, how do I wisely conduct my affairs in the world? Like, what is wise? Like, is it wise to steal from everyone? No, because you don't really want to be stolen from. Is it wise for me to lie to everyone all the time? No, because I don't want to be lied to. And a society that's made up of liars and thieves, which it is, by the way, but in my mind, you know, as you can look around you, that's why we need a prison system. That's why we have to deal with issues like the death penalty. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, I tend to have maybe a little more of a less. I think that it's a both and to some degree. People are good and people are not good, and it's, you know, but we all do bad, and that is kind of sad. No one in this world who hasn't done something wrong, hasn't done something bad, and done something that they would regret. Everyone. It's a common thread. That's where religion comes in and says, hey, we can fix that. And they all have different ideas about what the solution is, of course, but it's dealing kind of with the problem of human nature that we do lie and steal and kill and have, you know, commit adultery and whatever else. So, interesting stuff. Any thoughts? Anyone want to speak now who didn't get to speak during the discussion? I'm trying to think. Was there anyone who didn't chime in? I don't know if I heard from you. I want to make sure everybody gets 10 points today. So if you didn't get a chance to say something, rock our worlds now, blow our minds with something profound. Any ideas? Any thoughts? Totally agree with everything? Nose never point that you're like, that's a bunch of crap. That's when you speak up. When you get that twinge in you, you're like, hold on a second. You know, that's when you speak up. And that's encouraged, because we're not going to all think and feel the same and have the same worldview. We're going to have some common ground, and that's what we're really hoping to find out. But ultimately, you know, there's going to be some differences of opinion and belief and whatever, or lack of belief or whatever. So
I like that we're all like talking. I like to hear everybody's thoughts.
yeah. I mean,
this is very open. This way with everybody speaking.
like hearing everybody's views, and it helps
There you
us
go.
in that worldview to hear everybody's point of view.
Absolutely.
I got some of my thoughts changed today just by hearing other people.
Good.
So
That's good news. I think that we should. What you said was really profound. You know, we're the human experience in this room. There is diversity. We all have a different story and different background. We have some common things. Obviously, we're all from the same area, and but we all have something that makes us unique, makes us who we are. And so, I enjoy the conversation and the dialogue, hearing what people think and how we disagree, and hopefully you can develop your ability to articulate what that thought is and defend it rationally. Who does? Oh yeah, I thought you did just fine. Pretty good. I really did. You say that, but I think you did fine. Was that humility? You were showing humility, which is a value. Admitting the limitations, that's good. I appreciate that. So any final thoughts? Anyone get to say anything? All right, well, we can go ahead and probably cut out of here. Let's take roll. Okay, so one of my important human values is mercy. So there are a few that didn't say anything, but I'm not going to deduct here. Everybody's going to get the 10 points that they were here today. But do not mistake my mercy for being a pushover. Next time, please contribute. I want to hear from you, and I think it's important that everyone get a chance to share, even if you didn't do the reading. So if you didn't read, that's okay. Nobody knows that. Just wing it, It's not that hard. We're going to kind of bring all the content to the surface and put it out there. You'll hear what it's about just sitting in the room. That doesn't mean don't read, by the way. Don't misinterpret that. That's not what I mean. So let me log in. Okay. And then we want to make sure everyone knows what to do for homework. Yeah, I was going to double check that, but I think you're right. Tuesday you will turn in your first... Oh, wait, no.
I thought it was due Thursday.
Yeah, actually, it's really not due until, as long as you get it done before we come back to class Tuesday, September 4th.
Oh.
Yeah, so in the far right column on and maybe I just show you this so that we can make sure we all understand.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
I don't know what
I
you
thought it said the 28th.
Good.
That's a different class. I've got 4 of them.
Well, let me see here. Did I put the date on those assignments? If I did, it'll be...
It's after the 28th and before we have class on that Tuesday.
Right, exactly. After the 28th and then before we have class on Tuesday. So, let me see
So
here.
when you have the week's schedule where it says due online, that just means before the following week?
Yeah, it's basically like when we tear out of here on Thursday at the end of a unit, anything in that due online column you have to have done before we come back the following Tuesday.
Okay.
So you kind of have all weekend to do it. Yeah, I should clarify that. So,
No, I think I got your class and another class the next day.
so today was the 23rd. Tuesday's the 20... What did I write? Did I write the wrong thing? No, I got it right. Okay, it's 28th and 30th is next week.
Okay.
So then, when we leave next Thursday, a week from today, and you go home, you'll have all the way until you come to class on the 4th. Okay.
So it's almost 2 weeks away.
Exactly. And it's going to be over this article here today. So when you, and I'll remind you about it, and I'll tell you exactly what to do Thursday for sure. So before next week, print the Kinnear et al. Article, A Short List of Universal Moral Values, and the handout on, well, no, actually that will be for Thursday. So just Tuesday, come ready to talk about the short list of universal moral values. And we kind of touched on a lot of it today, but we'll look at the exact list that these guys give us. And it's a pretty good list. And what I'll do is I'll try to go in and put the due dates on these assignments so that they show up on your materials page. When you get to this homepage, you'll see it in this column. It says upcoming. It'll only take me a few minutes to do, but I'll do that for you so you can see everything in the course and when it's due. I thought I did, but I thought I actually.
Kid running around.
Right, I thought I did and I didn't, so that's my bad. I will put that there. You need that. I think it'll help. So, grade attendance, but we're not going to do attendance like that. We're going to do it like this.
So we don't have an assignment due next Tuesday?
No, just read. Just read your heart out. You have no excuse not to have mastered that content since there's nothing else for you to do. Let's see. Well, you might have other things in other classes to do, but 8:23. Okay. Benefield, when I call your name, you can go. And I will see you all here next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Colton Brown.
Here.
Jordan Cheek.
Here.
Brandon Cotto, sorry. Dandridge, Dobbs, JC, Yvette, Jacob Gray, Kyle Harvey, Melissa Harvey. Oh, 101, you had a big score for that one. That's all right. Okay. Sydney, Adriana,
Here.
Gretchen,
Here.
Mason,
Right here.
Natalie, Carlos,
Right here.
Ashton, Oldham, Paul,
Here.
Ian,
Here.
Hunter,
Sorry.
Hunter Upchurch, not here today. Okay, Warren.
Here.
All right, Mason again.
Here.
Jacob.
Here.
Okay. So far, so good. What's up? Yes.
I did not know it was supposed to be here Tuesday. I thought it was just Thursday class.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know if I could do anything.
You didn't.
What I need to know.
No. Did you see the email I sent?
No, because for some reason I cannot sign on Schoology. So
Okay.
I tried to do it yesterday and the day before, and it's just not.
So your homework is to basically figure that out and then look on the course plan and then read the article we discussed today and then have the next article ready to discuss when we come to
For
class
Tuesday?
yeah. And we meet every Tuesday, Thursday, 2 to 3:20.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
I had a question to ask you.
Ask away.
Personally.
Ask on.
So you were mentioning, morals, and in a sense, it's kind of how we were raised. And, certain people were raised to do this, other people were raised to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with Hatfields and McCoys by any chance? And the
Only sort of anecdotally. I don't know the whole history, but I've heard of the family feud sort of
Right.
thing. Yeah.
And it's these families would kill each other
Mhm.
for, in your sense, as you said, cold blood.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of I was thinking about that, and my question basically is, what do we define as moral as an individual person,
Mhm.
and while not thinking about the people that are around us who maybe have the same beliefs as us? If you are, say, in your own group,
Mhm.
you're alone,
Mhm.
what would you base?
So how can you be alone if you're in your own group? I guess
Well,
I'm not sure I understood the question there.
You're not influenced by other people's decisions. You've basically grown up making your own decisions. I don't really know how to put this other than you weren't really raised with any morals or values or ethics or anything
Sure.
like that. I don't know how to just attack.
No, I mean it does happen. I mean it's gonna, I think, lead to probably a difficulty of functioning in larger society because those rules and norms are taught and held by most people. I mean, I'm not sure if I really understand the question. I think there will, you can take a child and raise them to be evil. I mean,
right,
and tell them that it's good.
Right.
It may not be their fault.
Right, and that's the thing.
But,
if someone's raised to do wrong, does that make them a bad person, even if they believe that what they're doing is right? Because I've watched so much Criminal Minds.
Sure, no.
It's a question.
I think it comes down to what we would call normative. Even in psychology, there's sort of normative beliefs that, are considered good for a human to flourish.
Right.
And if you raise a person bad, they're not going to flourish. They're going to suffer some way.
Right.
And so kind of what we see is people that, flourish in life, they had a healthy environment, or they came to a point where maybe somebody pointed out, like, your whole life was a lie and you were told wrong, and this is what,
right.
And then it changed them. They're like, oh, wow, you're right. And they get on the right track and they're transformed. But sometimes it damages the brain, and they can't undo what was done to them.
Because it's habitual.
It's habitual, but it becomes neurological.
Right.
If you tell a person their whole life growing up that they're no good, you're evil, you're bad, you're wicked, you're going to damage them. They're going to hurt them. It's abuse. And then we find people that are affirmed and loved and, told the difference between right and wrong and corrected and put on, they grow up to flourish more.
Right.
Is that a purely animal thing, or is it a society thing? I think it's a balance of both. I think the human brain, at least at this point in the evolution of the human species, good, flourishing people have certain traits and qualities as opposed to people who are not flourishing who have sort of bad traits, and how they got them depends on their environment.
Right.
But I don't know if I answered your question anymore.
Well, you did. I kind of asked two questions at once, but my question was basically just what is I didn't even know that there's actual normality.
Yeah, I mean, but again, we're basing that normative on the larger picture. So,
and that normative, when you said that I guess in our next lesson of the atheist, the Christian, the Buddhist, what they all agreed on, is that little column the normality, or is that something entirely different?
I don't know if I'd say normal, but maybe common. Sort of something that we could agree on.
Okay.
Which I guess if we're all in agreement that is quote unquote good, perhaps these are normative values.
Okay.
So yeah, I think to some degree we could find some agreement between people who believe and don't believe, and read the article. Tell me what you think. I think it'll answer some of those kinds of questions. Sure, and it'll give you a good balance of the argument for that thought that there is a universal thing, and then the argument against it, and they deal with both sides of it. And the argument against it is interesting as well. We'll talk about it.
Yes, sir. And you said Schoology, right, or Hill College?
Schoology. Or go to hillcollege.schoology.com.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can get there also from the Schoology or the Hill College website.
And I don't need an access code?
Nope, just log in. Same way you would log in to register for classes or check your email. Same stuff, same login.
Excellent, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Yes, ma'am.
So I actually will not be here next week. My grandfather passed away, and so I'm gonna be gone.
Okay.
I know you said you're going to drop, or I read in the syllabus the last 2 zeros for attendance are dropped.
Is
this something is that going to be one of those two?
It could be. Do you not want it to be?
No,
or
I'm
you,
just curious,
you're holding out for other better used drop?
I'm going to be gone for sure.
Okay, I mean, that's what I was saying. It won't have any impact on you. Just, all we're going to do is talk about those values that are in the article. And then there's a handout on Thursday that is dealing with values as well. So just as long as you read that, you should be fine.
Okay, cool.
And then if you have any questions at all about what you read, just let me know and I'll fill you in. And then we'll put those two on for your two dropped. And then, if it comes down to it that, for some, reason you have to miss again, we could probably negotiate.
I don't foresee anything, but obviously I didn't.
Sure, absolutely. So don't feel bound, if something comes up. I mean, obviously this was unforeseen, and so it's a little bit out of your control. I'm not going to hold it against you. I'll put them in there, but if something else happens down the road and you need to take off, don't worry about it. It's still only going to be a percentage of your grade, and so...
Not super important.
Yeah, even after the 2, if you miss 2 more, we're looking at, 16 weeks, so like 36 or 32. I mean, the average of what the impact of even missing half of those is not that big of a deal. Now, most people don't do the math to figure that out, and I don't want them to, because then they'd be like, hey, I can miss a bunch of days. But anyway, being here is to your benefit, but missing a few days isn't going to hurt you too bad, so you'll be fine.
Well, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.